From its origin as a military garrison founded by Julius Caesar, Florence had grown into a small, prosperous city along the Arno River. By the early 12th century, Florence became the heart of a young republic governed by an oligarchical assembly of merchants, as well as a major center of textiles in the region. The city eventually grew to become one of the biggest centers of banking in all of Europe, with the House of Medici becoming a major player on the Italian peninsula. Around the same time, a renewed interest in the classical art and a boom in economic prosperity led Florence in particular to become the core of the Renaissance, which swept across all of Europe and sought to match, if not outdo, the arts and culture of the classical world. One of the ways that Florence displayed this renewed interest in classical art was through the architecture of its grand palaces and imposing public buildings. But few buildings hold the Renaissance heritage of Florence, as well as the city's churches. Although its entire city is scattered with a myriad of churches of absolute beauty and artistic heritage, I'll only be focusing on the city's cathedral, the Santa Maria del Fiore, for this video. By the 1300s, Florence had grown in not only power but also in population, becoming one of the biggest cities in Europe. So much so that it was decided that the city needed a new cathedral to not only accommodate more people, but also display Florence's new power. Now, there already existed a cathedral in Florence, that being the Church of Santa Reparata, although by this point the church was considered too small to be Cathedral of Florence. So in 1296, the first steps were taken in the construction of this new cathedral. The initial work on the cathedral started by the Italian architect and sculptor Arnolfo di Cambio. Arnolfo di Cambio made good progress with the church, most notably carving the statues for the facade, until he faced a small setback in 1301 when he died. Of course, due to this event, the construction of the cathedral was severely slowed down, until 1331 when the Arte della Lana, which was the Florentine wool guild, took over the construction of the cathedral. The guild appointed Giotto di Bondone and Andrea Pisano to continue the work on the cathedral. Giotto began work on the campanile, or in other words, bell tower, while Pisano most famously worked on the bronze doors of the baptistry right across the cathedral. After the death of Giotto in 1337, Pisano took the lead in the construction of campanile, in which he added the first two stories, which are covered in panel cladding and relief. Construction on the cathedral promptly halted due to the emergence of the Black Plague, which by the end of it had killed over half of the Florentine population. Despite the small setback, construction on the cathedral could restart rather promptly, with a series of architects taking the lead in finishing the cathedral. Francesco Talenti, the architect who took the lead after Pisano, finished the campanile and enlarged the scope for the cathedral ground, which would create some problems. In 1375, the old church of Santa Reparata was finally pulled down, and by 1418, the church was for the most part complete, with two exceptions, that of the dome and the facade. With an external radius of 54.8 meters, that meant that this dome would be larger in size than the biggest dome in the world at that time, which was the Pantheon in Rome. Building a dome of that size would still be a challenge today, but in the 15th century, a dome of that size was unheard of. In 1418, a competition was held to design a dome for the cathedral, with the winner of the competition being the architect and sculptor Filippo Brunelleschi. The way that Brunelleschi built the dome was to massively oversimplify by building two layers, one inner and one outer, and connecting them via 24 stone half arches onto a stone ring near the top, with only 8 of those arches being visible on the exterior, which gives the dome its famous octagonal shape. The dome was, for the most part, finished by 1436, with the exception of the lantern, which was a cupola meant to crown the dome and let natural light in through the dome. Another design competition was held and, surprise surprise, Brunelleschi's idea won. Although Brunelleschi would die in 1446 before the lantern was finished in 1471. Up to that point, the facade of the cathedral was still left unfinished, with the only part of the facade actually finished being up to the top of the portal, or gates, originally built by Cambio all the way back in 1294. This led to Lorenzo de' Medici, ruler of Florence and a wealthy banker, to start a competition to complete the facade of the cathedral between 1490 and 91. Although this competition proved absolutely fruitless, with it taking another 396 years for the facade to finally get finished in 1887. This time the construction was led by the architect Emilio de Fabris, who had won another design competition in 1864. Seriously though, what's with these Florentines and these design competitions? This time, the construction to finish up the facade took place between 1876 and 1887, and finally the cathedral was complete. The inside of the church is laid out in a typical cross layout, with the nave being divided into 3 parts, with 10 imposing Gothic columns, 5 on each side, reaching from the main portal of the church to the transept. The 44 stained glass windows, colorfully painted, help illuminate the polychrome marble floor mosaics from the 16th and 17th centuries. The easily recognizable main bronze portal of the church dates from the 19th century, depicting the life of the Virgin Mary, and it was designed by the sculptors Giuseppe Casioli and Augusto Passaglia. And as you enter the church and look above the entrance, you will see the beautiful 1443 clock, designed by the painter Paolo Uccello, as well as a mosaic depicting the coronation of the Virgin Mary by the painter Gado Gadi. If you look to the left as you enter the nave, you'll see the famous painting dating from 1465 by the painter Domenico di Michelino, depicting the Italian writer Dante Alighieri, holding a copy of his life's work, the Divine Comedy, while surrounded by various worlds which Dante describes in his story. The most famous display of artistic talent and heritage in the interior, however, is much like the outside, seen on the dome. The Last Judgment is a grand mosaic filling in the interior dome of the church, and much like the outside has become a symbol of the Renaissance which swept over Europe. After the completion of the dome, it was left whitewashed for quite some time. This led to the Grand Duke of Florence, Cosimo de' Medici, to have the 3,600 square meters of unpainted roof to be filled in. The project to paint the ginormous fresco began in 1572 by the painter, architect, writer, whatever you can think of, Giorgio Vasari, and he continued to work on the fresco until he died in 1574, leading to the painter Federico Zuccari to finish the rest. The church is a monumental display of Renaissance ingenuity, craftsmanship and artistic talent. The church houses works by many of the Renaissance's most recognizable figures, and from its initial construction in 1296 to the completion of its facade in 1887, the cathedral had experienced about 600 years of evolution in European arts. The church is not only a masterpiece of art, but also a masterpiece of engineering and architecture, as Brunelleschi's dome held the record for the largest dome for over 400 years, and to this day it still remains the largest masonry dome in the world, to this date nearly after 600 years of standing there. The church is, to put it simply, a great masterpiece of not only the Renaissance, but also of European art in general, and this church is still appreciated to this day for its absolute beauty and ingenuity.